I never intended to look. It was just an accident, a brief glance as I passed by the couch, but once I saw what was on the screen, I couldn't erase it from my mind. It had been an ordinary afternoon, one of those slow days where time seemed to stretch endlessly. I was carrying a pile of freshly folded laundry to Ethan's room, trying to distract myself from the tension in my marriage to James. Ethan, my 25-year-old stepson, was lounging on the couch scrolling through his phone with the ease of someone with no else to be. As I walked past him, something caught my attention, the soft glow of his screen. I glanced down without thinking at first. I didn't quite register what I was seeing, but then I did. His phone was filled with provocative images of women, and a muted video began to play. The content was unmistakable, and my breath caught in my throat as I stumbled. The laundry nearly slipped from my hands. Ethan must have sensed me because he turned quickly. His face flooded with guilt and scrambled to lock the screen. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one, and don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support, Lena. He stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. I quickly turned away, my face burning, but as I walked away, my heart raced. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind, and I knew nothing between us would ever be the same. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake what I had seen, the images, the brief video, all of it kept looping in my mind. Ethan's reaction, how he rushed to lock his phone and stuttered. My name stayed with me even longer. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. He was a young man after all. It was natural, harmless. But it wasn't the content that disturbed me. It was the unspoken tension that had settled between us that evening. We sat at the dinner table, just the two of us. James, as usual, was still at the office, leaving Ethan and me to navigate the silence that had grown heavier with every passing second I tried to break. The silence. Have you heard back from any of the places you applied to? I asked. Ethan looked up from his plate, his expression guarded, not yet, still waiting. He replied, his voice flat. I nodded, twirling my fork through my salad. Something will come through true soon. It's just a matter of time. Yeah, maybe, he muttered, pushing a piece of chicken around on his plate. The conversation died there, and I noticed how he avoided looking me in the eye. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to put the previous day behind me. I threw myself into housework, cleaning with an almost frantic energy. By mid-morning, I was vacuuming near the couch where the eye incident had occurred. Ethan walked in, his hair still damp from the shower, a mug of coffee in his hand. He paused when he saw me. Morning, he said cautiously. Morning, I replied, not looking up for a moment. He lingered as though searching for something to say. Then he finally spoke. About yesterday. I froze, the hum of the vacuum filling the silence. You don't have to explain, I said quickly, turning off the vacuum and standing up. I didn't mean for you to see that, he said, his cheeks turning red. It's fine, I said, waving a hand. Dismissively, just forget it happened. He nodded, but the tension in his posture suggested he wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, we tiptoed around each other, careful to avoid anything that would bring up the incident, but the tension lingered, simmering beneath the surface. I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his gaze lingering a little too long before darting away. I wasn't immune to it either. There were moments when I caught myself watching him, noticing things I hadn't before, the way his jaw tensed when he focused the quiet confidence in. The way he moved, the tension between us began to grow, unspoken yet palpable. One rainy afternoon when James was away on a business trip, Ethan and I were alone in the house. I was in the kitchen making tea when he walked in. Once, some, I asked, motioning to the kettle. Sure, he said. Leaning against the counter, we stood in silence. As I poured the tea, the only sound the rain pattering against the windows. Finally, he spoke. Lena, I don't want things to be weird between us. Looked up, startled. They're not weird, I said. He gave a small, rural smile. They are. And it's my fault. It's not your fault. I quickly reassured him it was an accident. Still, he said softly, I don't want you to think anything bad about me. I set the down on the counter and faced him. Ethan, I don't think badly of you. We just stared at each other, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Then he stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. Lena, he whispered. I didn't let him finish. Ethan, I said quickly, stepping back, his face flushed. I'm sorry, he started, but he turned and left the kitchen, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over again. Around midnight, I got up hoping a cup of chamomile tea would calm me. To my surprise, I found Ethan in the living room, the soft glow of the TV lighting up. His face. "You're up late," I said. Leaning against the door frame, he glanced over. His expression softening. "Couldn't sleep, me neither." I said. I hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the opposite end of the couch. We sat in silence for while the low hum of the TV filling the room. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Do you ever feel stuck?" he asked quietly. I looked at him surprised. "What do you mean, like your life isn't really your own?" he said. "Like you're just going through the motions?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I feel that way." Sometimes. He turned toward me, his gaze intense. "What do you do about it?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know. I try to focus on the things that make me happy, the little things." He gave a small, humorous laugh. "I wish I knew what those were for me." Before I could respond, he moved closer, his expression softening. "Lena," he said, his voice low. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I didn't move. Slowly, I reached out my hand, brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through me. But I quickly pulled back. "We can't," I whispered. "I know," he said, barely above a whisper. But neither of us moved. Neither Ethan nor I mentioned what had happened on the couch that night, but the tension between us had shifted. It deepened, becoming something unspoken and impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before we found ourselves alone again the next day. A storm rolled in, bringing with it heavy rain and howling winds. James was still out of town, leaving Ethan and me to weather the storm alone. The power went out early in the evening, plunging the house into darkness. I lit a few candles in the living room. Their soft glow casting long shadows on the walls. Ethan came downstairs, his phone in, hand powers out everywhere. He said, sitting down on the couch. "Figures," I replied, sinking into the chair across from him. "Looks like we'll have to entertain ourselves the old-fashioned way." He grinned. "Got any board games?" "Probably," I said, laughing. We ended up playing Scrabble on the coffee table, the candlelight flickering as we exchanged playful comments over questionable word choices. "Zone's not a word," I said, laughing as I placed my tiles. "It is," he protested. "Look it up. How the internet's down," I teased. "Then you'll just have to trust me," he said, grinning. His grin was infectious, and for a moment I forgot about the storm outside. But as the game went on, the playful atmosphere shifted. Our hands brushed as we reached for the tiles, and I felt the warmth of his presence, palpable and intense. When the game ended, I started to gather the tiles, but Ethan reached out and stopped me. "Lena," he said. Softly, I looked up, meeting his gaze. The air between us was charged, full of unspoken words. Before I could respond, he leaned across the table and kissed me. It was hesitant at first, a question rather than a demand, but when I didn't pull away, it deepened. The unspoken tension of the past few days finally broke when we pulled apart. I stared at him, my heart pounding. "This is crazy," I whispered. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady, "but it doesn't feel wrong." After that night, everything changed. The invisible line between us had been crossed, and there was no going back. It started with small moments stolen, kisses in the kitchen, lingering touches when no one else was around. But as the days went on, we became bolder. One afternoon, while James was still away, Ethan found me in the laundry room folding clothes. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me before stepping inside. "Need help?" he asked, his tone teasing. "Do you even know how to fold a shirt?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. He grinned. "Not really, but I'm a quick learner." He moved closer, and when his hands brushed mine, I looked up. The intensity in his gaze sent a shiver down my spine. "Lena," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't stop him when he leaned in, and soon the laundry was forgotten as we lost ourselves in the moment. It wasn't long before others began to notice that something had changed. Rachel, my best friend, was the first to comment. She came over for coffee one morning and studied me carefully as we sat in the kitchen. "You seem different," she said, her tone casual, but curious. "Different how?" I asked, forcing a light laugh. "I don't know." She said, tilting her head like happier. I shrugged, trying to play it off maybe. I've just been getting more sleep, but Rachel wasn't convinced. Well, whatever it is, keep it up. It's nice to see you smile. I smiled again, but her words stayed with me long after she left. Ethan's ex-girlfriend, Sophie, reappeared soon after, throwing another complication into the mix. She showed up at the house unannounced, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and her smile sharp. "Hey, Ethan," she said sweetly, "long time no see." I watched from the doorway as Ethan greeted her, his posture tense. "Sophie," he said, his voice guarded. "What are you doing here?" said, brushing past him into the living room. Ethan shot me a quick, apologetic glance before following her. I stayed out of sight, my heart racing as I strained to hear their conversation. I heard, "You're staying here now," Sophie said, her light tone with an edge. "How's that working out?" "It's fine," Ethan replied, his voice barely sign. "Really?" she echoed. "You used to hate this place. What changed?" When Ethan didn't respond, Sophie laughed softly. "Interesting that evening, Ethan and I sat in the living room, the tension between us palpable. Sophie's trouble, I said finally. "I know," he replied, his jaw tightening. "But she won't do anything. She's just fishing for information." "You're sure?" I asked. He hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, she's all talk." But his uncertainty lingered in the air, and for the first time I felt the weight of what we were risking. After Sophie's visit, Ethan and I became more cautious, but our feelings only intensified. The secrecy added a new thrill to our encounters, and the stolen moments became bolder. One afternoon, when James was at the office and Sophie hadn't resurfaced, Ethan found me in the garden. I was pruning the overgrown rose bushes, trying to distract myself from the chaos that had become my life. "Need a hand?" he asked, leaning against the fence. I glanced at him, sweat glistening on his brow from the heat. "You know anything about gardening?" "Not a clue," he admitted with a grin. I laughed, shaking my head. "Then you're useless out here." He stepped closer, his tone shifting. "I can think of a few ways to make myself useful." The playful exchange quickly turned into something more as he took the shears from my hands, his fingers brushing mine. The garden, with its tall hedges and overgrown vines, offered the illusion of privacy. We took full advantage of it, but even as I lost myself in the moment, the thought of what we were risking loomed large in my mind. A week later, Sophie returned. Her sudden reappearance caught both Ethan and me off guard. She knocked on the door just as I was stepping out of the shower. Forcing Ethan to answer it, I could hear her voice from upstairs, sharp and inquisitive. "You've been acting weird lately," she said. "What's going on?" "Nothing's going on," Ethan replied, his tone defensive. "Right?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm supposed to believe that when I came downstairs?" Sophie's eyes narrowed as she took me in. "Oh, hi, Lena," she said sweetly. "I didn't realize you'd be home." "This is my home," I said evenly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, how silly of me to forget." After she left, Ethan and I sat in intense silence. "Check on to us," I said. "Finally, she doesn't know anything," Ethan insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "But she suspects I counted. And that's almost worse." Meanwhile, Rachel's curiosity was growing harder to deflect. She called one evening, her tone casual but probing. "Do you want to grab lunch tomorrow?" she asked. "I can't," I said quickly. "I've got too much to do around the house." There was a pause before she replied, "You've been busy a lot lately." "Everything okay?" "Of course," I said, forcing a lightness into my tone. "Why wouldn't it be?" "No reason," she said, though her hesitation was clear. "I just worry about you sometimes, that's all." I assured her I was fine, but the conversation left me rattled. It was a Saturday evening when James returned from his latest business trip earlier than expected. Ethan and I were in the kitchen laughing over a shared bottle of wine when we heard the front door open. My heart leapt into my throat as James's voice echoed through the house. "Lena, Ethan." Ethan's hand froze halfway to mine, his eyes wide with panic. "Quick," I whispered, shoving the wine bottle into the fridge. "Act normal." James walked into the kitchen moments later, his expression cheerful. "What's going on in here?" he asked, just catching up. I said, my voice a little too bright. James's eyes lingered on the two glasses on the counter before he nodded. "Nice to see you two getting along," as he turned A way I let out a breath I hadn't realized. I'd been holding Ethan, caught my eye, and for a moment the fear of what could have happened overshadowed everything. Else the near discovery left us both on edge, and it wasn't long before the strange began to show. Ethan became more possessive, his frustration boiling over one quiet evening in the living room. Why do we have to keep sneaking around, he demanded, his voice sharp. You know why? I replied, my tone firm. We can't let anyone find out, but I'm tired of hiding, he said, running a hand through his hair. I sighed, feeling my own frustration rise. This isn't easy. For me, either, Ethan, but we don't have a choice. The tension simmered between us for the rest of the night, leaving me wondering how much longer we could keep up. The charade, it was Rachel who finally pushed us to the breaking point. She stopped by unexpectedly one afternoon, catching me off guard while I was cleaning the living room. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice serious. What's going on? I asked, setting down the duster. She hesitated before speaking. I think you're hiding something, Lena, and I think it has to do with Ethan. My heart raced as I tried to keep calm. What makes you say that? It's just a feeling, she said, her eyes searching mine. You've been different lately, and I've seen the way Ethan looks at you. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. Lena, she said softly, if something's going on, you need to tell me before it's too late. That evening, I shared Rachel's suspicions with Ethan. We have to be more careful, I said, my voice trembling. Or maybe we should just tell the truth, he said, his tone defiant. Are you insane? I snapped. Do you know what that would do to this family? This isn't a family, he said bitterly. It's a lie, and I'm tired of pretending. His words hit deep, and for the first time,